All righty. Welcome one and all to this year's Whatcom WRITES reading of from the anthology Interconnectedness, inspired by this year's Whatcom Reads selection Greenwood by Michael Christie. This kind of kicks off the week of Whatcom Reads events coming up this week. So we look forward to welcoming Michael Christie to Bellingham for a whole series of events. And actually part of the great thing about this one is we have an original piece from Michael Christie published in this copy of Interconnectedness alongside of this year's authors. If you haven't read it yet, encourage you to. It's a wonderful piece and I think indicative of why we chose him for Whatcom Reads. So we're going to get started now.
Okay. The video is working. Participants.
Hi, Alice. Can you put yourself on mute, please?
You probably said something, but I can't hear you.
Hey, Alice, on the bottom right of your screen, can you hit the mute, please? There you go. Okay. So our very first reader today is going to be Alexandra Lucas. Here we go. Alexandra is a narrative designer for Crazy Maple Studio. She contributes chapters to anthologies on pop culture and gender theory, and in her free time, she plays tennis and develops board games with her husband. Recently, Alexandra's story, Harmony, was featured in Hamlet's 2021 winter issue, Golden Age. Welcome, Alexandra.
Hello, thank you so much. Yeah, so just go ahead and dive into my piece here. All right, Good stuff. All right, well, thank you so much for that bio intro. I appreciate it. And the piece that I have in this wonderful anthology is called A Very Old Friend. All right. When I was 13, I was a girl on the verge of awakening. I'd begun to want people and things with a hunger that I hadn't felt before the ascension of puberty. Friends who had once giggled beside me at Girl Scout campfires were now neatly sorted into confining cliques. After some assessment, I decided to join the theater kids, which was how I'd ended up at a haunted house in the old meatpacking district on Halloween night. The second I stepped out of my grandpa's sedan, my friend Jess called out, "Come on, Jem." She guided me to the line that wound out of the meatpacking warehouse where my grandpa used to work. Despite the reverent way Grandpa Abe talked about this old place, everything about it sent snakes up my spine. The artificial lights and fake skeletons seemed like childish attempts to cover up the maimings and macabre discoveries that my grandpa told me had happened here. So it was hard to relax alongside my blissfully unaware friend. Jess interrupted my dark thoughts with a spot-on Mae West impression. "Why so glum, kiddo? The night's only just kicking off." I couldn't help but grin. A happy outcome of movie nights with my theater friends was that several of them had turned out to be pretty good at mimicking old Hollywood starlets. Besides, Jess added in her normal voice, "You have a hookup with a certain hottie to look forward to tonight." A hint of mischief in Jess's eyes made my heart flutter. "Please tell me you didn't spill to Corey S. that I, you know." "No way, but your cute crush is coming tonight, so you never know." Before Jess could finish her thought, the crowd swelled as more middle schoolers overwhelmed the line, separating us from our other friends. By the time we reached the ticket counter, all I could focus on was getting inside. "We'll find everyone later," I assured myself as Jess and I stepped through the creaking doors and into the old processing plant. Even though I knew the evil doctor scene in the first room of the haunted house was manufactured, I felt that same unease from before creeping up on me. Fake blood was almost more unsettling after all I learned about the real blood spilled here, both animal and human. Jess laughed and pointed at the scowling actors, but my enjoyment waned as I remembered the nerve-wracking possibility of being alone with Corey S. As we turned down a hallway made to look like a cornfield, the lights flickered. My stomach lurched, so I turned to Jess. "I need a break, but you should keep going." "Are you sure? I can wait until Corey catches up," Jess whispered with a wink. A contortionist actor hobbled by us on his hands with a ghoulish grin. I'll be fine. With this guy patrolling the halls, what could go wrong?" After waving her phone in the air and mouthing, "Text me," Jess hurried to the next room. As I sat on a bench, the overhead lights flickered again, and I was alone. Growing up in the Midwest, I wasn't a stranger to cornfields, but something about the wispy stalks brushing together in the absence of wind had a claustrophobic effect indoors. "It's just the AC," I told myself. Right as I calmed down, an angry gale picked up outside, this time, when the lights flickered, they went out. And that's where I'll go ahead and stop there. So thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you, Alexandra. And even though you blurred the background, it looks like you're in the back of your car. Is that right? Or in the passenger seat?
Yes, we're on a road trip all throughout California. So.
Wow, that is fantastic. Thank you so much for including us on your road trip. And that's one of the advantages of being virtual, is that you can do this. So thank you so
Absolutely.
much. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Yay. All right, next up is our reader is Beth Bacon. She's an author of books and poetry for young readers. She's published humorous books for reluctant readers, nonfiction books about animals, and recently 2 books explaining COVID and vaccines. She has an MFA in writing for children and young adults from Vermont College. Welcome, Beth.
Hi, thanks. We practiced this beforehand. I'm going to attempt to share my screen because my submission is a pictorial poem. I came across last year a long technical description of tree decay put out by the Forest Service in the 70s. And even though it's very technical, I was just so inspired by it, and the illustrations are amazing. So this poem is not only inspired by Greenwood, but also by this technical description of tree decay. So here goes. All right, can you guys see this sort of mishmash of pictures? So these
Yes,
are
it looks
from
great.
the Forest Service informational bulletin. And here is my poetic take on all of these tree inspirations. Tree decay starts with a wound, a break in the bark, a blow of an axe, a nail, a nick, a gash, a graze, an incision, an injury, an in for invading organisms, micro to be sure. How micro? If you scaled up an average wood-bearing microorganism to the size of an average lumberjack and scaled up the man in turn, he'd be over 700 miles tall. The invaded tree would loom 40,000 miles above them both. And so a tide of organisms, micro to be sure, enter a wounded tree, take up shelter, take in nourishment. Biologists and foresters call this first wave pioneers, like those American explorers who journeyed west. Their success at converting heartwood to heart rot very much depends on the hardships they face. Rain, ice, snow, wind, heat, cold, competition from other organisms, micro to be sure. And then there is competition from the tree itself, which, despite its seeming still and silent stance, does not sit idly by. From the moment it first perceives its wound, that break in the bark, that blow of an axe, that nail, that nick, that gash, that graze, the tree brings out a battery of chemical and anatomical defenses. Biologists and foresters call this compartmentalization. The tree builds walls within itself, above and below, and on every side, then keeps on growing all around the rot. It's an orderly response, systematic and effective, until the next wound. And there is always a next wound, a blow of an axe, a nail, a nick, a gash, a graze, and always a next wave of organisms, micro to be sure. Biologists and foresters call this succession. What those organisms lack in size, they make up for in quantity. The tree, once again, responds by building walls within itself. The epic match marches on. Succession and compartmentalization, compartmentalization and succession. And so that brings us to the point of this poem. Like an axe, a nail, a nick, a gash, a graze, there must always be a point. When did you begin to feel the question eating at you deep inside? The need to choose a team to cheer for, a side to side with? Do you flow with the organisms micro to be sure, arriving in successions, seeking shelter, consuming pulp, creating rot? Or do you stand with a tree, ever silent, systematically building walls to trap the rot inside? Compartmentalization and succession, succession or compartmentalization. This poet leaves it up to you. Though before you decide, there is also a third option for your consideration. Almost forgotten, the man in the middle, the mighty lumberjack, 700 miles tall, snoozing on the coast. Paul, you're still muted.
Thank you. My space button wasn't working. Thank you so much, Beth. That was beautiful. And your writing was so visual. You didn't even need the illustrations, but the illustrations are lovely. Thank you for including those. Good. Next up is Bob Zaslow. Moved here from New York to Whatcom County with his wife, Ann, in 2018. He's a retired documentary filmmaker, teacher, and advertising copywriter, and he's won an American Film Festival, Bronze Clio, and Effie Awards. And he's been published in the Best 10-Minute Plays of 2019, and he has 6 children's books. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you. Beth, that was extraordinary. I've never heard a science lesson delivered as poetry, and it was truly amazing. Thank you for this great opportunity. Also, what an opportunity for me, Bob Zaslow. My name starts with a Z, but I'm third because Bob starts with a B. This is great. I do write children's books, and this is one of them. It's called The Bossy Bassoon. Let me read it off from my monitor. When the orchestra in the town of Harmony lost its first bassoon, he was replaced by a bossy bassoon who overwhelmed all the instruments. "Bassoon, you're spoiling the orchestra," said the conductor. "Nonsense," said the bassoon. "One day you'll change your tune," she said, and marched away, shaking her head. One day became the day when half the town of Harmony turned out for a concert, but Bossy Bassoon played so loudly he left the woodwinds winded, the brass breathless, and the strings quivering in a corner. Even the loudest percussion instruments wanted to drum the bassoon out. "Worst concert ever," grumbled the people of Harmony. "How do you feel now, bassoon?" asked the conductor. "Oh, I feel fine. Is it my fault? The other woodwinds were weak, the strings were tight, and the brass blew it?" "There's no I in orchestra," said the conductor, but the bassoon just snickered. Well, the next weekend, only a handful of people attended the concert, and bassoon overpowered all the instruments again. "Do you still feel fine?" asked the conductor. "Well, not fine exactly. No one came to see me." "No one came to see the orchestra. Were you really happy bossing everyone around?" she asked. "Of course. But when I noticed how the strings cried and the brass blew their noses and the other woodwinds wheezed, not so much." "Do you know that you can never be happy by making others sad?" asked the conductor. "Well, it's too late to do anything about that now." "No, it's not. You can change if you want to." "I don't want to." Then he added, "But if I did, what would I do?" "Instead of overpowering the other instruments, try to give them power." "And take the spotlight off me? Why?" The conductor thought a moment and asked, "What's my job there on the podium?" "Duh, you conduct us." "Yes, I make each of you feel special in your own way. And you know how that makes me feel?" Left out?" No, it makes me feel great. Look, bassoon, make someone else feel good. What do you think will happen?" He let out a slow bellow. "I've been a big dope, haven't I?" "Well, you haven't exactly." "You know what?" he interrupted her like a big dope. "I am going to change." The next day, he apologized to everyone and said he would stop his bossy ways. And the following weekend, half the town packed the auditorium for the concert. And a concert is what they heard. After all, concert means all the instruments working together in harmony. Well, during the standing ovation, as the instruments took their bows, the conductor said, maybe we should call him the in-tune bassoon. The end.
That's fantastic, Bob. Thank you. You're a natural born actor.
Oh no, it was 3 years of lessons at HB Studio in Greenwich Village. But thank you.
Even better. Next up, we have Brooks Kolb, the principal of Brooks Kolb LLC Landscape Architecture. After studying at the University of Pennsylvania, he moved to San Francisco, where he witnessed two key periods of gay history: the post-Stonewall era of sexual freedom and the AIDS epoch. He lives in Seattle with his husband, Dennis. Welcome, Brooke.
Thank you very much, and thanks for this opportunity. Bob, you're a very hard act to follow. So this piece is called Low Rise North, and it's abridged from my forthcoming memoir, Rainbow Catcher, coming of age in the 1980s. The lobby of Low Rise North was deserted, except for a young African-American man who sat behind a table, nose in a book. Hi, I'm Brooks, I said. I've been assigned to room 312. Momentarily glancing up, he gruffly said, I'm Alonzo. After pointing me to the stairway, he quickly lowered his eyes to his book. He was very handsome, and Alonzo was the sexiest name I had ever heard. Mounting the staircase, I heard him greeting a black comrade, laughing and joking with gusto. I already envied that man. The next day, I met my fellow Penn transfer students. Susanna dashed off to a sit-in. Linda had smuggled in her boyfriend, John, and I envied their love. I resolved to find a girlfriend, even though I never fantasized about going to bed with women. One night, another dorm mate named Susan regaled me with her colorful Southern yarns. Soon, a cloud came over her face, and she excused herself to call her unreliable boyfriend. Feeling abandoned, I daydreamed about a very cute acquaintance who lived across the street in a crumbling off-campus apartment. Interrupting my reverie, Susan came back in. Let's go over and drink beer with Harry, she said. In a flash, he buzzed us in. Susan launched into one of her stories, and Harry responded with a wink and a smile. He wasn't making a move on her, which confused me. Did it mean he was gay? I didn't have a clue. Unsure how to ask him whether he liked me, I chose not to reveal any cards about my sexual orientation. When Susan and I shared pictures of Rolling Rock, I heard Marvin Gaye's What's Going On for the first time. The song moved me deeply. It had a way of bringing us all together, softening Susanna's activism, validating Linda and John's romantic love, and giving voice to the struggles of the Black students. By now, I knew the reason for Alonzo's hostility. Already on the lower floors, the Black Student Union was on a mission to annex the top 2 floors. I didn't yet appreciate the heavy burden of racism the Black students endured, so it bewildered me that they were actively countering Dr. King's gains by petitioning for segregated housing. One day, I watched some Black students gather to celebrate the expansion of W.E.B. Du Bois' house. Spotting Alonzo laughing and joking, I wanted to join in, but I knew that I was not invited. I sighed, wishing I could wave a magic wand and make America's ugly racism disappear. Then maybe Alonzo and I could be friends. Maybe we could be more than friends. Thanks.
Hey, thank you, Brooke. One of the things that one of the inspirations for putting this anthology together is to help to connect the writers in the community and bring them together. So we're able to access this through reading each other's works and also through these lovely biographies. So thank you for the thought that you all put into these and for letting us to get to know each other a little better. Appreciate that. Next up, we have Catherine Shornick, who has lived in the Northwest for most of her adult life, finding its restorative nature inspirational and necessary. She's long explored and written about the human experience, particularly as associated with children, women, and aging. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you so much, and I'm just taken with the writing ahead of me. So thank you for everybody. I'm going to jump in midstream in my story. I have to say before reading this story, though, on this day, that I offer my deepest and most sincere and unequivocal support for the people of Ukraine, Romania, and Eastern Europe. Catriona greeted Gabby at the door and led her upstairs. Gabby was so flattered to have her boss's full attention, she nattered on and on. Gabby, have a seat, Catriona gestured to the armchair. I don't mean to pry, but could you tell me about your family? Like, do you have siblings? My family? Well, sure. Gabby shifted in her chair. I have a sister, Dana. She lives in DC. When my internship is over, I'll be there for grad school too. Gabby thought of her younger sister. She begrudged me when we were kids, but I think we're turning the corner. Why was that? Oh, I was adopted and I'm a year older than her. I was 4 when my parents adopted me, and it was hard for her to suddenly be a younger sister. Gabby looked down. They got me from Romania. Catriona's fist went to her mouth to stifle an explosion of emotion. Were you raised near Kansas City by chance? Gabby stared at her boss. Well, yes, why? I know this sounds crazy, but I believe I saw you in the orphanage just before you were adopted. In Romania? The two women studied one another. How is that even possible? Gabby's orphanage memories were akin to obscure recurring dreams, sounds and smells more than anything, incessant sorrowful wails at slow speed, the banging of cribs against walls, television voices echoing down corridors beyond the closed doors of crib rooms, the sting of urine in her nose, a chilly smell that permeated everything. Her recollections coincided with the pain along her sternum. As a child, Gabby's parents encouraged her to put aside intermittent thoughts of a little girl from the same crib, since there was no way to trace her. Gabby couldn't argue, and really, the girl was only a blurry bit of a large and hazy mosaic. Besides, it was Dana who she shared parents with and had curled up next to at night. Catriona steadied her voice. I worked for an agency that identified children available for international placements. You were with other girls about your age. Do you have any memory of that at the orphanage? Gabby shook her head slowly, at last allowing her gaze to dwell on the images of cribs and stark rooms. She covered her mouth with her hands. Catriona moved her chair closer and gently touched Gabby's knees. I don't know how this happened, but I was there and now you are here. I have thought of you so many times over the years, you have no idea. Her voice dropped to a whisper. This is a lot to process, but I need to know if you remember a twin sister in Romania. Do you recall? Gabby's head was spinning. A sister? But wouldn't they have been adopted together? Her parents never said anything about siblings. Catriona squeezed Gabby's hand. I've learned of a young woman named Sasha who has written about being adopted as an older girl from Romania by a family in Florida from the same orphanage. She had a lazy eye and a limp. Gabby's breath nearly stopped. For a moment, she felt small arms entangled with her own.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. And thank you also for your acknowledgement of the Ukraine. I know it's very far away, but it also strikes very close to home.
Yeah.
And puts all of our own problems into perspective.
It does.
Thank you. Next up is Karina L. Harden. She's worked as a land use consultant for over 20 years. She's a Bellingham native and fond of the outdoors, boating, and gardening. She lives with a longtime partner and is never far from her dog. Karina is currently assembling the writing materials she intends to become her first novel. Welcome, Karina. Sorry, Karina.
That's great, thank you. And it's a real pleasure to be included in the anthology. I'm gonna start with Today Will Be Better and the introduction. Allison craned her neck to verify the time. She did the mental math to calculate how much she had. 5 minutes to pee, pull her hair back, and walk to the house. A change out of the clothes she slept in was warranted, but would wait. 22 minutes left. It wasn't unusual to problem solve with the voice of her subconscious. She was an introverted problem solver. Lately, it was crowded in there with 2 voices analyzing her every thought. The newer voice had a staccato, abrasive tone, urging continuation of the suspended state of procrastination and self-loathing. 14 minutes left. She willed herself to straighten her legs under the bedclothes. Today'll be better. said her normal voice. It was odd that she hadn't noticed how weak her normal inner voice was, so full of doubt. She thought of Esther and Nan in the big house. 4 minutes left. Esther can't get Nan up by herself, prodded normal voice. 1 minute left. Her entire body hurt. This must be how it felt if you had bone cancer. Could she have bone cancer? Don't be silly. You're a healthy woman in your prime, said normal voice. You never know, said snarky new voice. Allison pressed up tenderly with her opposite arm and swung her feet to the ground next to her bed. Today she should take a shower, she thought. Yes, applauded normal voice. Why bother, argued newer voice. Today you won't look at the old articles. That may have been more believable if it had come from the newer voice. Allison half smiled to Aunt Esther as she entered the house through the back door. Esther in her 80s, her hair was done, lipstick expertly applied and chosen specifically to match the hot pink tracksuit. Esther had made coffee and it was still hot. She patted the table, motioning to Allison to join her. Aunt Nan was still asleep. Until now, Allison had successfully avoided Esther for several days, managing to escape any real opportunity to acknowledge Allison's current state of disarray. Aunt Nan, the middle daughter, was Esther's junior by 12 years, but her physical health had been declining. And Allison, willing to leave her job at the hospital and move next to them, was the reason the last two sisters were able to avoid the nursing home. The three of them were each other's only family. Tell me, said Esther, no matter what it is. Tell me, what in the world is going on with you, Allison? I'm getting worried about you. And that's where I'll leave off.
Thank you, Karina. Right. Our next reader, Denise, is a photographer, traveler, dancer, avid reader, baker, writer, and paralegal. Wow, that's a lot of hats. Living in Bellingham with her partner and grumpy schnauzer. Denise has a master's degree in marriage and family therapy with experience working with the teenage and homeless population, substance use, and domestic violence and suicide risk matters. Thank you for what you do in the community, Denise, and welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm new to the community, so I'm really excited to be here. My poem's entitled A Photograph of Time. I'm just taking pieces from it. So I'll begin. At 11, you barely knew me. It was my older sister that circled your friends. She took a picture with you included. That picture sat on a shelf in her room during my childhood. 15 years later, we pass each other at a party. I overhear you boasting of work and travel to my sister. My ears perk up as if I recognize your voice. I grin at your enthusiasm, but all I can do is listen. Months pass and my friend inquires about any single ladies. She has a boyfriend who knows a single man. They wish to make a mission of it by fixing him up with someone new. I know someone new, a single friend, my boss, who does not date. Let's see if we can play a game of matchmaker. Eager to fix them up, we exchange pictures on their behalf. Oh, the pictures of you, but I do not know this yet. And so 9 months later, my friend invites me to a 4th of July party. The apartment sat next to the beach. As I enter the apartment, a feeling of nostalgia creeps in. I've come home, I've been here before. Maybe it was the evening sunlight that settled into the living room, or the window in the kitchen that ushered in a gentle breeze. I am no stranger to such places. I grew up in sunlit-filled apartments. And then there you are. But how? You live here? But I do not know this yet. And so time passes. My friend invites me out again to what we coined Duck Out Friday. We are to explore the town together and leave our worries behind. Her boyfriend is there with a friend. And to my surprise, it is you. I stare at your face, this face my soul knows. From some place, from some time, I hear your voice, a hearty laugh warms my heart, and a tinge of knowing comes over me. Who is this person to me, and why does he linger? Yet that night was the beginning. We talked, we laughed, we danced, we inspired the other. We challenged and bickered and flaunted our cleverness. We connected in a way that we had never done with others before. We are inseparable. It was spiritual. It was kismet. And before long, Duck Out Fridays became every Friday night, where we left our worries behind. One evening, as we chat away upcoming plans for the weekend, we exchanged pictures of our former selves from our teenage days. And to my surprise, he sends me the one picture, you know, the one on my sister's shelf in her room from my childhood. But how and when? You are the one in the picture on my sister's shelf in her room from my childhood. Now I stare at your face, this face that my soul knows, from some distant place, from some distant time, and a tinge of knowing comes over me. You were here all along. What took you so long? We needed to grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. That's poignant. Next up is Falah Jones, who's written numerous tales. One novel plops us in a mental hospital, one in a boarding school, and another in a dystopian USA. Oh, present. She writes personal essays and talks to almost everyone she passes on the street. She lives in Seattle with her husband and chickens. The dog died. Falah.
Hello. Am I seeing my, okay, hi. Hi, we just got a new puppy, 3 weeks old, so don't worry about the dog. Okay, I am going to be reading excerpts from my piece called Connect the Difference. A theory to which I have long adhered came from a Muslim follower with a frame on life that explained a lot. He said we humans are each a bit different so that we will need one another. If we were all the same, if we could all bake bread or skin a goat or write code, we wouldn't ask for help. We wouldn't beg a lift or a cup of quinoa or a pat of butter or just a pat. We would all have the same strengths, the same powers. No need to interconnect. I include all things on earth, the water's ripple, the swift cheetah, the baby crow of the Corvus genus. Everything has a role to play. Some of us are predators. Some of us are prey. Some of us are smart. Some of us sit still as a mossy rock or a bump on a log, depending. I once had a friend, not a close friend, who told me right out that I wasn't a good friend because I never asked her for anything. She wasn't emotional or mad. She just said it. I sputtered, shocked at her declaration. Giving and helping is a two-way street. That applies to animals and birds, flowering plants and bees, trees and mycorrhizae. We can't make it on our own. Fledgling birds, branchers, hang out in the bushes after leaving their nests, relying on their parents for sustenance. Some birds don't look back. Those precocious young, my stars, some mate for life. Some fare well in flocks. At dusk, we witness the spectacular influx of tens of thousands of crows flying to one chosen destination for safety, for friendship, for learning. Edges of time and edges of places weave connections. The last bits of meadow leading into a forest where a confluence of species survives. At the end of the day, before the night begins. Between meetings, after a class when students tip a glass or trade tales around a campfire, at the borders of countries and neighborhoods, at the crepuscule of life as we sit in a chair with wisdom to share with grandchildren on our laps. But power and wealth can insulate. Myth, humans thrive only around their peeps. It is certainly easier to be surrounded by like minds, where everyone agrees that Twinkies are to die for and kale is rabbit food. But no one can subsist on Twinkies or kale alone. Try a bite of the other side. There is safety in numbers. We want to find our group, but not to the exclusion of others. I think back to a time standing in a line with strangers in a mosque in Cairo. Their fresh washed hijab covered their hair, smelling like the sun-dried bed sheets on my clothesline at home. We touched foot to foot, shoulder to shoulder. We prayed out loud in unison, connected.
Beautiful. Thank you, Falah. Sorry, I'm still meditating on your themes.
Good.
Yeah, it's bringing a lot to mind. Thank you for that. Next up is, actually, before I move on to the next one, so I've talked about how we've had a lot of new faces here, and I'm very heartened by seeing all the new readers here today. And also sorry for all the readers we couldn't include in this, because we had 65 readers or 65 authors in this anthology or so, and we couldn't include everybody. I'm also very glad to see some veterans of our Whatcom WRITES anthologies, and Harvey Schwartz, I'm not sure, but I think you might have the distinction of being published in every one of these Whatcom WRITES anthologies. So next up is Harvey Schwartz, has a personal directive to make plans, but keeps his peripheral vision. This philosophy has served him well, including hitching west for summer vacation, not going back east, to going on campus at Western for a lecture and coming home registered for 2 classes. Welcome, Harvey. Good to see you again.
Thanks, Paul. I wrote a short story called Albert to the Rescue, and it's fairly long, so I just have time to read the opening and the ending. Annie pounds her keyboard in a pathetic attempt to recreate times she kicked the TV to get it to work. This exasperating futility leaves her feeling empty, since the creative words just aren't coming. She feels like a shadow of magician, Awesome Annie the Anarchist, that wowed small groups of friends at Berkeley as an undergrad, while she came out of her shell and pondered how to save the world. Life has thrown her a few curveballs, and she feels like she's whiffed miserably. She decides to walk up to Lake Padden to clear her mind. Stepping through her vintage oak door, she ponders the bright orange handmade sign she pasted inside it. 1984, 2001, 2029, 2067. The first 2 are years of futuristic novels. The red box around 2029 reminds her that this year used to be the future. And time keeps racing forward. Devastation of Earth's resources drives 2067, her novel that's stuck in neutral. Heading up the busy road below her house, she's careful, since the mostly electric cars are silent. She turns up the gully towards Padden and reflexively puts on a mask as a high school cross-country team heads in her direction. And now I am going to skip to the end of this story. Her son Jedediah kept up the family tradition of brilliance in times fraught with environmental disaster. His work creating what he called micropods of livability could make the differentiation between cities and rural areas obsolete. His favorite activity was to walk the trails of Lake Padden Nature Preserve to clear his mind and think the kind of thoughts that could offer some hope that maybe it's not too late to save the world. Keeping with the family tradition, he always says, "Hi, Albert," to the latest manifestation of Barred Owl, who sits on a perch in the gully. And sometimes he could swear that Albert not only ruffles his feathers and tilts his head slightly towards him, but also winks. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Harvey. Great to see you.
Wise.
All right, next up we have J.L. Wright, who was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and relocated to Whatcom County after visiting all of the continental United States. Publications include her books Unadoptable Joy, a memoir in poetry and prose, and Homeless Joy, an expose in poetry and prose, and numerous poems that have been included in anthologies and periodicals. Her poems have been published on 4 continents so far, and also she's a great literary citizen of Whatcom County, also teaching through our Interconnectedness Writers program. Thank you for that, JL, and welcome. Are you here?
She needs to unmute.
So JL, we can't hear you. I think probably you might need to exit and then come back. I'm sorry. Yeah, sometimes that's the only way to do it is to leave and then come back again. This is the voice of God speaking, by the way.
Thank you, Claire. Appreciate that. Okay, so we'll move on to the next reader, and then when JL comes back online, we'll go over to her. Okay. Yes, all hail Claire. Thank you, David. Kenneth Meyer and his wife May have resided in Whatcom County since 2013. Kenneth says, "We love Washington State." Thank you and welcome, Kenneth.
Thanks. And thank you for all those who supported this event. You know, I said to somebody this morning, public speaking and writing are 2 separate skill sets, and I just wish I had one of them. But anyway, that notwithstanding, let's go ahead. And the title to this is too long, so we'll skip that, but it's a kind of detective story. And I'll follow the Harvey methodology and just read part of the beginning and the ending. It's about an abduction from a certain territory and a detective who goes to look and see what happened. Secretary Fung's office had the view of the harbor, and Leo admired it before nodding his head. "Secretary?" "Please sit, Inspector," said the Secretary for Security. "I need someone to investigate this Chigua Fen business. Relatives of the billionaire real estate tycoon had reported him missing that day. She, of course, is not a citizen of our region," continued the Secretary, "but for the purposes of this inquiry, we have to treat him as if he is. After all, he lived here. She occupied a high-end suite on the 41st floor of the Four Seasons Hotel, which was just blocks away from the city government. The tycoon had apparently crossed over into the mainland during the early hours of Saturday morning. Ascertain the facts," directed the Secretary, "and then we'll proceed. What happens to one person in a case like this, it's like it happens to all of us, and the press is screaming." Leo, the detective, said, "I'll start at once." Now let's skip ahead to the end. Anyway, he looks into it, and this is what he reports. The same day, actually several days later, Inspector Leo was again in the office of the Security Secretary to give his preliminary report, which was also the final report. The Secretary still had the good view, and there was a seagull on the ledge just outside the picture window. "Go ahead, Inspector Leo." "Sir, there's no proof either way, but I call your attention to the alarm by the family and then their retraction of the same. Obviously, they were told to back off. G's statements that he departed for medical treatment and then he had some diplomatic status, all of that is nonsense. As for going to assist a campaign against corruption or to give information on economic crimes, you don't volunteer to help being wheeled down with a black sack over your head. It's more like he's about to be charged or they're detaining him while they assemble the case. The Ministry of State Security, which is the foreign entity, abducted him or threatened him and escorted him out, which are about the same thing. The clumsy way they did it proves it was them. They might as well have left their card at the Four Seasons front desk. So I want to respectfully ask, sir, did an outside ministry or a local liaison officer advise you they were going to take this action? Did we concur in it?" And Leo thought to himself, if we did, why in God's name would we do that? Which was like giving the Ministry of State Security a carte blanche to run riot locally. If we're following the one country, 2 systems, at least let us have our system of legal action intact. The Secretary was also exasperated. You know, they put us in these impossible situations. To my knowledge, no one in our government was informed of this operation. Had we been asked, we would have requested that we be allowed to make the arrest. And that's it for today. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Kenneth. JL, let's try your, we'll take yourself off mute and see if you're working now.
There we go. How's that?
Yay, thank you.
There's always more than one way to skin a cat, they say, but I don't want to really know that. I really just wanted to do a shout out to the author of Greenwood, Michael Christie, because that novel was so exciting to me. And it really, the interconnectedness really played meaning to me. So my poem is called The Dawn of Connectivity. The joy I reveled in of dawn's connectivity, glistening glare of dawn's sunshine on water. My friends of community, I seek your collective guidance. Dawn slips silently, splitting the darkness. Sleep pastes my eyes closed tightly, and cool mist collects on leaves overnight. Swirling scribbles scrawled upon the walls. Above rainbow refractions, dawn continues to gleam. In my joy, I know death is not darkness. In my joy, I understand dawn. I allow dawn inside my warmth. May she be a refraction of soul in the scarred wrist vein. Morning, a bright star shining from the sun as dawn marches bravely into a new day.
Lovely, thank you. Next up is Christina Silverbears, who loves literature. She's a proud mother of 4 amazing daughters and hopes one day to be accepted to a PhD program. Her short stories have been published in Whatcom WRITES 6 times before. It's always an exciting event. Thank you for that shout out.
Thank you. Okay, I'll be reading Olivia. Getting on the train shouldn't have been as hard as it was, but with every bump and clack of the wheels, I felt more and more sure that this was a mistake. I should have stayed in Chicago. In Chicago, I was safe. In Chicago, I was white. Daddy didn't want to let me go. Why leave? Why risk it? Why dig up the past? Normally, I'd listen to him. We were alike, Daddy and I. Not just the same sandy brown hair, the same myopic eyes, the same preference for mashed potatoes instead of stuffing. There's a sameness that transcends that. We're both disinterested in challenges and arguments. We're the kind of people who never tell you that we don't like chocolate, even on the 4th year of your Christmas cookie exchange. Daddy and I understood that the argument isn't worth the fight. But this isn't something that I could let go of. I had tried, really, I had. But Mama's letter on my 21st birthday changed everything. It's become more important to me than anything else I will ever own. I open it in the morning when I make my tea. I reread it on the bus to the hospital for work. I finger the photographs during my lunch breaks. Those faded papers keep me company in the bath, at the grocery store, everywhere. They're with me always. I kept them with me at first, I think, hoping that I would come to understand her choices, that I would know how she could leave one identity behind and then just pick up another. Then one day at a Barnes & Noble, a family came in. They were beautiful. He was a black so dark his hands nearly matched his jacket, and his face so loving as he held his son in his hands. Just a beat behind him, his wife, the boy's mother. Pale, not blonde, but she might have been once. She smiled at the boy as they examined board books. I couldn't get them out of my head. I didn't want to. They were real and they were glorious, and they were a family in a way that not everyone gets to be. I began reaching to my mother's papers for clues. Mama left DC in 1968. She was just 20. Dr. King had just been assassinated, dozens more injured, thousands arrested. The future looked bleak. Bleak for all Americans, Black or not, but being Black in the South was particularly dangerous. Who wouldn't flee that? Besides, Mama had a plan. When she arrived in Chicago, she wouldn't be Black. She would pass. And I'll stop there.
I see lots of applause on the videos. Thank you, Christina. Good to see you again. Next up, we have Leslie Ferris, who just finished biking the Erie Canal with 36 fellow Bellinghamsters. Congratulations. And she'll be reading today from her piece, The Ride.
Thank you. It's a treat to be here, and I'm excited about this event. We're captive on a carousel of time. We can't return. We can only look behind from where we came and go round and round and round in the circle game. Joni Mitchell's lyrics visit me often as of late, as I approach a decade of life that was always meant for others, surely not me. Time, that great equalizer, seemed to stretch far beyond eternity without end. The getting off and on the carousel, taking turns as it rotates, an unexamined concept. The final dismount, never fully confronted. My darling grandson recently looked up at me with such wide-eyed innocence at 3.5 and asked, "Mimi, when will time stop?" When indeed will it stop? When will I step off the carousel? This growing awareness of the great circularity of time has led to a new intentionality, reflection upon what is important, enduring, what matters the most. Retirement forces the question, as does the loss of loved ones, the birth of our children's children, the need to understand the mysteries at the hub, the center of our days. My husband of 41 years surprised me as he plans for this cycle of our lives, for himself, for me, and as it happens, for many others who have found themselves in his orbit. Mounting a bicycle, leaving his life's work behind, he invited a couple of others to join him cycling our county roads every Saturday, followed by a cup of coffee upon their return. It began with a few and is now a peloton of 100 lycra-clad souls showing up for 10 years. For most, it has been life-changing. Men and women from all walks of life circling around each other in search of health and community. And what they have found as spokes in that large wheel is a good deal more. Each week, the group falls into their orderly pace line, taking their places as their wheels turn in sync. They depend upon one another as they weave, draft, and maneuver through obstacles and hazards, building trust over the years. Then drawing alongside one another on quiet country roads, they share stories and plans, jokes, and reflections on life before pedaling back to their starting point for more coffee. There have been broken spokes along the way, injuries, illnesses, divorce, deaths, hardship, and the hub has spun faster to compensate, bringing help, solace, meals, repair, wheels turning in compassion. Hobbled spokes restored, returning to the hub of their strength every Saturday. The peloton has challenged one another in life-giving ways to reach out to volunteer and travel together, spinning them together even more tightly. There are already younger cyclists merging into the pack, gathering new purpose as they experience the hub and meaning of relationship. The seasons, they do go round and time is a universal truth that knows no favorites. However, as this circle of cyclists has learned, it is there at the center of the wheel where community is built and life gathers meaning. That's it.
That's it? More. That was beautiful, Leslie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, the next biography is practically an entry unto itself. Laura says, trees are familial. They are analogous to our own lives, often branching, splitting, and creating something new. Only with the interconnectedness of water, light, soil, and spirit can true transformation and growth take place. Although a tree typically conjures an image of symmetry, in nature, trees display curious irregularities in their branches, bark, and canopy. Kindred is structured to invoke this predictability while pausing on the meaningful deviations. Laura Leigel is a farmers market director, writer, and author. She lives here in Bellingham. Welcome, Laura.
Great, thanks, Paul. Thanks for that introduction. My name is Laura Leigel, and I'm also the author of Second Parent, which is a memoir that focuses on my experience as a queer non-biological parent. I am very connected to stories that focus on family and relationship and ask that question of what makes a family. Is it that genetic connection, or is it choice, or something in between? And I think Greenwood definitely dove into some of those questions. This short little poem, Kindred, for me is about the interconnectedness between family generations and how sometimes you have to cut something down or let go of something in order to make space for something new. So it's called Kindred. At the time, I did not know I cut a fir to watch it grow. I looked around upon the ground, only broken branches, dusty tinder to be found. Rain poured sideways, sun did shine, water and life and light, roots who would not die. From that pollard, alchemy, old to new, the earth soon came alive with tender wakeful shoots. I looked inside that big old stump, and to my surprise, I did find that cut down tree was a little me. In the middle where the circles were so round, so true, I dug a hole with my 2 bare hands and planted a tiny seed which sprouted into a little you. Upon the wind, boughs and buds opined, our bodies grew and grew and grew until they intertwined. That big tall tree is no more, but in its place, 2 new shades of green, worn wood, and open door. That's it. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Laura. And Laura Legal, thank you. I often have my name misspelled, but not mispronounced. So, but I'm still sensitive to that. Thank you. Appreciate it. Next up is Marianne Exel. She loves writing, fiction mostly, and travel, especially to France, where she lived for 2 years in her younger days. Born and raised in the UK, Exel practiced law in Atlanta for 30 years before moving to the Pacific Northwest. She's the author of the Sarah McKinney Mystery Series and her forthcoming work of Second World War fiction. Nice to see you again, Marianne.
Hi. Thank you, Paul. I'm trying to get the speaker view, but I can't get it. I will start anyway.
You're good.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I am really honored to be included in this anthology with so many fresh, new voices this year. It's great. My piece is called Neighbors. Karen's nearest neighbor was Madame Leclerc, who lived in the farmhouse 100 meters up the road. Madame's husband, Paul, had sold La Bergerie to Karen 30 years ago. It was a source of some amusement to him that foreigners were willing to pay good money for a near ruin. The relationship between the 2 women was now set in stone, polite, respectful, but distant. Karen decided there was still enough light left to climb the hill and visit Madame Leclerc. She had not seen her for some weeks. Karen paused to regain her breath before knocking. A television blared inside. She had to rap twice before she heard Madame's espadrilles snapping on towards the door. Karen thrust forward a bunch of white freesias as the door opened. At the market earlier, the flowers' creamy freshness had appealed to her. Now they looked like a bridal bouquet. Madame Leclerc's glare made Karen afraid that she regarded the flowers as an impudent joke, but then a smile pulled at the corners of Madame's pursed lips. For me, thank you, come in. Madame Leclerc turned and shuffled off, leaving her visitor to follow into the dim interior. She returned from the kitchen, placed a blue jug containing the flowers in the center of the table, fumbled with the remote control to turn off the television, and then dismissed the set with a jerk of her head. A gift from my son-in-law in Toulouse. He's in the business. Please sit. Karen struggled to remember the names of Madame Leclerc's offspring. How are the children? Responded Madame Leclerc, the explosion of breath summing up her disgust for her neglectful offspring. They want me to move into a maison de retraite. I know what they're after. They want to sell to a rich foreigner for a vacation home, but they'll have to carry me out feet first. Her small black eyes brimmed with tears. Red splotches scarred her sunken cheeks. Karen searched for a way to calm the older woman. You've been here for a long time, I know. When did you first come to the farm? Madame took a shuddering breath and then replied in a more measured tone. I came here in 1938 to cook and clean for old man Leclerc. I was 16. He was mean, hated to part with a sou, never could keep a servant. But I stayed. I fell in love. With Paul, Karen prompted. Madame looked at her as if she was crazy. No, with Andre, the younger son. He was so handsome, Madame said. Easter 1939, we got married. The old man didn't object. Now he didn't have to pay me. We had only a few months together, one summer. What happened? Well, the war happened, of course. Andre was conscripted into the army. There was an exemption for farm workers, essential work, you see, but only one per family. Paul stayed, Andre had to go. He died defending Paris from the Germans. It broke the old man. He let Paul take over the property. Then Paul took me over as well. I married him so I could stay where I'd been happy. But did you grow to love Paul in time after the children were born? He was a pig. Madame Leclerc spat the words out. Karen's mouth dropped open and the old woman let out a cackle of amusement. I've shocked you. Let's have a drink. She pushed up from the table and went to root in a cupboard. Extracting a bottle and 2 antique cordial glasses, she filled them with a straw-colored liqueur. No, I never loved Paul. I did my duty as a wife and mother. They'll have this place soon enough. I can't last forever. The 2 women raised their glasses. To neighbors. Madame Leclerc downed her drink in one impressive swallow. To neighbors, echoed Karen, surprised but touched. It had taken 30 years for Madame Leclerc to confide her story to the stranger who lived next door.
That was delightful. Thank you, Marion.
Thank you.
Our next reader is Mary Louise Van Dyke. She's an author and historian who resides in Bellingham. As a journalist of 20 years, she interviewed immigrants, Holocaust survivors, and covered city and police events. She draws on her knowledge of family history in this story, Carrie's Journey. Welcome, Mary Louise.
Thank you. This story is set in 1875, and it is based on real events that happened to my great-grandfather and his siblings and his aunt. Carrie Duty glanced out the train window and shivered. So this was Iowa? Huge fields, tall grasses, tiny houses, oversized barns. She shivered, too vast, too empty. England it was not. Aunt Carrie, may I please get a drink of water? Asked Lizzie. The little girl clutched her doll that wore a gown stitched by Mary Jane, who was Carrie's late sister. Both Mary Jane and Edward, the children's father, were dead, leaving Carrie at age 23 as guardian of their 3 children. Ted jumped up. I'll help. Carrie nodded. George, do you want to go with them? George shrugged. I suppose so, Auntie. She shooed them towards a water cooler located at the far end of the car. Carrie's eyes drifted shut as familiar worries gnawed. Edward's family had offered them a home here in America. But was this long trip wise? All her family was in England. Here they would depend on these unknown relatives who might be lovely, or they might be. Here, Auntie. Water splotched Carrie's skirt as Lizzie held out the dipper. Lizzie, be more. She bit off her words as Lizzie's smile disappeared. Thank you, love. Are you scared too? George asked as she handed him the empty ladle. Just a bit, Carrie admitted. But your grandparents are eager to meet you, and won't it be lovely to not travel anymore? I didn't want to travel at all, George grumbled, and Ted shook his head. You're silly, George. How much longer do we have to go, Auntie? Just another hour, I think, she fumbled, and then we'll arrive at Lost Nation. Lizzie's eyes widened. Are we lost? No, but it's rather a peculiar name for a town, isn't it? The sun was setting when the train squealed to a halt in front of a tiny train station. Carrie breathed out as she glimpsed an elderly man and woman standing outside. Is that them, Ted asked? Grandfather and grandmother? Coats on, bundles in hand, Carrie shepherded the children towards the door. On the platform, the couple hurried towards them. Miss Doody, I'm Richard Myatt, and this is my wife, Elizabeth. His face resembled her late brother-in-law's. His wife held out her hands. Ted, George, Elizabeth, come here to Grandma. Feeling uncomfortable, Carrie moved to the side as the couple hugged the children. George submitted before squirming away and huddling against her. I want to go home to England. Carrie patted his shoulder. I know, love, but this is home now. And it would be home, she vowed. It must be.
Thank you so much, Mary Louise. Our next reader is C. Elliott Mullins, an adjunct instructor, a mental health counselor who doesn't practice, Friends of Cats, lifelong Pacific Northwesterner, extreme introvert, and an increasingly fearless lesbian poet. Welcome, C. Elliott Mullins, and thank you for not being an introvert just now.
Thanks for having me. I'm going to read my poem titled Mating Ritual. A screw, but not a screw, 2 threaded ends and tiny. We rifled through bins without success, our daily clamor to attach more securely the hook to the wall. I drove the getaway truck, reluctantly, but not really, waiting outside as you scaled the display and disassembled the fixture, retrieving the screw. We recount it now and laugh, your mating dance, my retreat to safety, the still wobbly hook. We don't discuss the meandering drive back, delaying the return to my husband and your ambivalence. We describe only the screw, the dance, the blatant theft, with no discernible bridge to hear.
Thank you. Thank you. Our last reader, and thank you to everybody for all of you, I'm going to say it again, good literary citizens for holding out and listening to your fellow readers and staying to the end of the reading. It's really most appreciated. Our next reader is Susan Chase Foster, and our last reader. And this biography is not included in the anthology, not for any fault of her own. She did send it to us, and while I want to give a shout out to our publishing staff here who puts this anthology together on a very tight deadline, it's amazing to me that we don't actually have more things like this where a biography doesn't make it in or a chapter doesn't make it in. But hopefully we'll have this her biography included in future printings. So Susan Chase Foster is a poet, writer, and world wanderer who writes in her backyard cottage in Bellingham. Her work has appeared in This Uncommon Solitude, Alaska Women Speak, Cirque, Raven Clan, and many other anthologies. She's the author of, I'm not going to say this right. Shay Shay. Oh, I can say that though. Shay Shay Taipei, Poems and Photos from Taiwan. Welcome.
Thank you. And thank you so much to Village Books for all, and you, Paul, for all the opportunities you provide for we writers. So I'm going to read snippets kind of strung together of this piece. It's called With Rilke and Ronda. Driving to Ronda, a pueblo blanco in the almost treeless, sweltering marble mountains of southern Spain, my husband and I blaze with excitement. A year ago, we learned that the mystical poet Rainer Maria Rilke spent 2 months writing here in the winter of 1912-13. We read that his room 208 at the Hotel Reina Victoria is now a museum open to the public and filled with personal effects touched by Rilke's trembling poet hands. What do you think about reading some Rilke in 208? I asked, fairly faint with romantic anticipation, as we parked the car in a lot fringed by conical evergreens. Their verdure reminds me of home, of Douglas firs bursting through fog or rain. My husband asks, did you bring some poems? Whoops. Ambling along shadeless streets, we come across a tiny libreria. Purchase Rilke's in Ronda letters and poems in Spanish because neither of us speaks German. We head toward what appears to be a shortcut to the hotel behind the Church of La Merced. A tiny nun in a starched white habit approaches us. She has the face of an angel, and sunlight collects around her head like a halo. This is a private area, a convent, she tells us, fingering the enormous rosary that also serves as her belt. Where are you going? It's very hot, no? When I answer in Spanish, the monjita, her halo shines even brighter and she lets us pass through. Finally, in the lobby of the old hotel, we're shocked when the guy at the front desk wrinkles his brow as though he's never heard of the poet. I hold up the book. Oh, yes, we remodeled that room. He points straight ahead. But if you walk just past the bar, you will find. And what we find looks like a diminutive fish tank containing a couple of Rilke's books and a framed page of something wrote by him in German. His handwriting is beautiful. We head outside to a treeless patio, sit near a lifeless statue of the poet holding a journal, look over the golden valley below, dotted with a few parched firs and waves of lavender mountains beyond. Our waiter, Pedro, who spent a few months in Seattle last year, brings us cervezas and a plate of cheeses. I ask, Pedro, do you believe Rilke gazed out on the same mountains, the same trees as we are now? Pedro nods. Por supuesto. These mountains have always been here. And yes, by the time Rilke arrived, most of the trees, as you can see, were gone. There was never rain, not like your 4 evergreens in Washington. Thank you.
Oh, that was a great way to end our reading. Thank you, Susan. And you know what? Thank you to all you readers. It took a long time, and I don't profess to be a good reader, but I think you've all just delivered your pieces extremely well. And thank you for the time and the care you put into not writing it, but presenting them so well. So this wraps our reading today, and you'll be able to see this on our YouTube channel here very soon. We're recording it today, and you'll be able to share that with others. Also, last week's event that is on YouTube, and you'll be able to see that. I believe Claire has put a link in our chat, so you'll be able to connect to our website. You can send that to folks if they want to buy copies of Interconnectedness. And hopefully we'll be running out of copies very soon so we can reprint more with Susan's biography included. So I look forward to seeing you all at the upcoming events at Whatcom Reads. And thank you again. Huge shout out. I wish we were in the same room together so we could give a good big group hug, but we'll do a virtual hug. Thanks all, and signing off. Bye-bye.